schools, not jails. Education is becoming more and more important these days, but how important is education compared to the incarceration of prisoners? There is more money being spent per inmate than per student. A way to keep the cost down is to have fewer inmates, and which in turn is more spending money and time on students who have a future and a chance to really do something in life. If the leaders in our world are claiming that education is the most important thing, then the people need to make a stand against how costly incarceration is and spend more on students. With the economy these days, schools and prisons are fighting for the funding. News10.net reports that in California there have been deep cuts to its school, nearly $18 billion in just 2 years. Some 26,000 teachers have received laid-off notices. Cutting nearly $18 billion is extremely outrageous, especially since the cut has been going towards the incarceration of prisoners. It isn't fair to those students who come from a difficult background and actually want to better themselves, but they can't because the funding for their education is just too little. People who are fond of education should be enraged by this because the money is going towards people who have lost their chance at freedom and career opportunities. In order to get the funding back for schools, the judicial system needs to make sure that the right people are getting locked up. It is actually cheaper to keep people in prison for life with no parole than it is to sentence them to the death penalty. If someone has committed a horrible crime, then they should just stay in prison until they die, because it costs millions less than it does to send them to the death penalty and possibly kill the wrong person, and that mistake is irreversible. DeathPenalty.org states that life without parole is millions of dollars cheaper than death row. Keeping people in prison for life is also the safest method, just in case the guilty person is actually innocent and the state didn't kill an innocent person. If the judicial system were to stop spending on the death penalty, then all that money could go back to the community and be beneficial for others. A few programs that could benefit from the millions not spent on the death penalty would be education, after-school programs, and the roads. Since death row is a serious matter, and if the court messes up, that is an innocent person without a life. DeathPenalty.org states that the federal court system spends approximately $12 million on defending death row inmates in federal court. Therefore, people who have been caught and there is hard evidence of their crimes are those ones who should be sentenced to death row. Those people who are sentenced to the death penalty should be the ones who have committed several murders and rapes and have been caught in action with plenty of evidence. Since the federal court spends about $12 million just on defending death row victims, just how much is spent per student than compared to inmates? Minddump.org states that each year the U.S. spends $9,644 compared to on kindergarten through 12th grade compared to the $22,600 per prison inmate. And here's a bar graph of the difference in the money. With numbers like that, you'd almost think that housing prisoners is more important than education. California spends about 7 times more money on the correctional system than grades kindergarten through 12th. This also means that California spends about 11% of its budget just on state prisons alone. That is equivalent to $52,363 per year to house an inmate. According to the California Department of Corrections, that's $143 a day per prisoner. As News10.net states, that kind of spending on people who already had a chance for education, for an educated future, just isn't fair to those who actually do have a chance. Prospect.org reports that nearly 75% of imprisonment happens at the state level. The state level is the general funding is where it also pays for the public needs, including healthcare, housing, and public assistance and education. If someone were to research and look back between the last 20 years, it is guaranteed that they will see that the education is definitely getting the short end of the stick while it's fighting for the state budget. 9 out of every $10 is spent is being spent on prisons annually. That's tens of billions of dollars that's coming out of that pot of money. Therefore, states are finding that there is simply less money available to invest in education, especially in these lean economic times. With the rising numbers of inmates, that means that education is being looked at less. In order to change this, the judicial system needs to change and only lock up those who have affected someone, not just with a traffic violation, not just doing something illegal but hasn't really been detrimental to something. No. They need to be locking up people who are violent, killed someone, or have done something terribly detrimental to the community, and then that alone cuts a lot of the cost. If education were the most important thing to our world, then the world needs to prove it by cutting back on prison funding and spend more on education in order to better our future for generations to come.